Imagine opening a grave and finding a skeleton, neck pinned to the earth by an iron sickle, a heavy stone wedged into its mouth, legs deliberately broken and folded backward. This isn't a horror movie set. This is a real cemetery in Poland, dated to the 11th century, and archaeologists just found 6 of them in a row. Welcome to the vampire graves of Eastern Europe. The year is 1725. A small village in Serbia near the town of Medveca is in full panic. A man named Petar Blagojevich has recently died. Ordinary death, nothing unusual. But within weeks, 9 of his neighbors are dead too, each one reportedly visited on their deathbed by Petar's ghost. Each one describing the same nightmare, a cold hand at the throat in the dark. When Austrian imperial officials arrive to investigate, because this region has just been absorbed into the Habsburg Empire and someone has to manage the hysteria, they find the villagers demanding one thing: dig him up. So they do, and what they find shakes even the hardened military officers present. Petar's corpse shows no signs of decomposition. There's fresh blood at the corners of his mouth. His nails have grown. His skin looks somehow new. The officers allow the villagers to stake the body. They document everything. They file an official report. And that report, known today as the Visum et Reperentum, Latin for seen and described, becomes one of the most significant documents in vampire history, not because it proves vampires exist, but because it proves that governments were now officially in the business of managing vampire panic. Here's what's actually happening in those graves and in that report, and it is far stranger and far more human than any monster story. Medieval Eastern Europeans, particularly in Poland, Romania, Bohemia, and the Slavic territories, had a profound and specific terror of what they called the strigoi, or vrikolakas, or upir, the revenant, the returning dead. This wasn't abstract theological fear. This was visceral, communal, agricultural. When someone died badly, suicide, excommunication, murder, plague, the community believed the body retained a kind of terrible energy. It could come back, it could feed. And when people in tight-knit farming communities started dying in clusters, which happened constantly due to tuberculosis, they needed an explanation that made sense of the pattern. One person dies, then their family starts coughing, then neighbors. The disease moves through households the way a predator moves through a flock, because that is biologically exactly what it does. The anti-vampire burial rituals were a response to this fear, and they were extraordinarily specific. The sickle wasn't placed around the neck as decoration. It was placed there so that if the body tried to rise, it would decapitate itself on its own burial tool. The stones in the mouth prevented the corpse from chewing, because revenant folklore insisted the dead fed first on their own burial shrouds, then on living family members. Broken legs meant it couldn't walk. Iron nails through the chest, through the tongue, through the heart. Bodies buried face down so they dig deeper into the earth rather than up toward the living. Some were buried at crossroads where confused spirits would be unable to find their way home. These weren't superstitious peasants being irrational. These were people trying to solve a real problem, mass death, with the diagnostic tools they had. And someone figured out very quickly that there was serious money in those tools. Here's what they don't tell you in the ghost tour version of this story. The vampire panic of the 17th and 18th centuries wasn't just folklore, it was an industry. The Catholic Church charged fees for exorcisms, for special burial rites, for the prayers believed to keep the dead from returning. In regions where the church had a stranglehold on burial rites, which was most of Catholic Europe, families paid for the correct burial to protect themselves. Pay for the full mass, the blessed soil, the proper rites, or risk your loved one becoming something that hunts you in the night. That is not spirituality. That is a protection racket with incense and Latin. In the Habsburg Empire specifically, the vampire panic created a bureaucratic gold mine. Officials were dispatched, at state expense, billed back to local territories to investigate outbreaks. The investigations themselves generated paperwork, salaries, travel costs, and official reports that required official responses. The Empress Maria Theresa eventually sent her personal physician, Gerard van Swieten, to investigate the vampire phenomenon across her territories. His 1755 report, Abhandlung des Daseins der Gespenster, concluded that vampires were a delusion caused by ignorance and recommended the church and state stop inflaming popular panic for profit. She issued an imperial edict banning vampire exhumations. The church predictably pushed back because the exorcism business was lucrative and vampire fear kept congregations desperate and compliant. But the costs went beyond church fees. When vampire panic hit a village, the economic disruption was catastrophic. Fields went untended because people feared going out at dusk. Crops stopped, livestock weren't moved. Entire communities quarantined themselves from their neighbors, which meant the tuberculosis spread anyway, unimpeded, while everyone was busy digging up graves and arguing about decomposition rates. The real horror isn't the staked corpse in the Polish cemetery. The real horror is what surrounds it, a village so terrified, so manipulated by institutions that profited from their fear that they were destroying their own bodies, their own land, their own futures, trying to fight a monster that was in fact a bacteria. Sound familiar? Because this is still happening, not with sickles and stakes, but with the same basic formula. Take a community's legitimate terror of death and disease, attach a supernatural or conspiratorial explanation that no one can fully disprove, and then sell them the solution. The 17th century church sold exorcisms. The 21st century internet sells supplements, detox programs, and fear itself, monetized per click, per view, per conversion. The mechanism is identical. The profit motive is identical. The human cost is identical. The people who dug those graves in Poland weren't stupid. They were scared. They were watching their families die, and no one with authority was telling them the truth. The institutions that should have helped them chose instead to profit from their confusion. The uncomfortable truth is this: the vampire was never the monster in these stories. The vampire was the explanation given to people who deserved a real one. The real predators wore vestments and imperial uniforms and filed expense reports. So here's the question that should follow you out of this video. What modern death, what disease, what cluster of unexplained suffering is being explained away with a monster story right now so that the people with real answers don't have to give them? Who's selling you the sickle, and who's getting paid when you buy it? If that question unsettles you, good. Subscribe, because that discomfort is exactly where the truth lives.